what AI is going to do is something I've been kind of concerned about in my own way about just the loss of jobs, right? It's going to replace a lot of work that we do today. I mean, there have already done studies proving how capable it is at certain tasks. So it's going to eliminate a lot of jobs. And what that looks like in the future, I guess, concerns me because, you know, as a society, we have a lot of individuals who rely on their vocation to earn a living. So what happens when those individuals are displaced from their work? Like there's broader economic impact on society as a whole, and what are countries and governments going to do to help address that? I mean, it's not as though we want to eliminate those jobs, but how are we putting in place the guardrails to help ensure that the individuals whose jobs are lost due to the advancement of AI, like what does that
So, hey, Satnam, hi. Welcome to the Cyber Express. This is called the Security Web. So, I think we have actually spoken a couple of times. Our conversations and journey actually goes a while back. In fact,
Yeah,
I
it's
think it's the
nice
first time
to,
that it's the first time that
I think
actually
first time connecting like this, right?
exactly that's the first. That's the first. But we have spoken way too many times over emails. Without wasting any more time, I would just briefly want to ask about how do you feel? How would you rate the evolution or probably the evolution of AI from the time ChatGPT was rolled out to probably now GPT-4 is right now is trending. And then there are so many new domains have come up with AI as the last words and things like that. So do you think we are in the middle of an AI revolution, and how do you think cybersecurity industry has been coping up?
I think we're still just barely scratching the surface, to be honest. It's like we're just in the infancy, really, with the rollout of ChatGPT becoming more available to the masses. And you see all of these new iterations coming out. There's a lot of creative individuals who are coming up with things like Auto GPT, which is like taking ChatGPT and then superpowering it, Agent GPT, creating these agents that will perform tasks, not just singular focused. So I think we're still just barely scratching the surface. And naturally, we have broader cybersecurity concerns about what that means in terms of like how will threat actors take advantage of these generative AI tools. And I mean, we obviously know some of the more common things that are available using these, LLMs, large language models. Essentially, what it does is it gives individuals who maybe lack the necessary skills to craft really good, very convincing phishing emails, and it gives them an ability to do that and be more successful. And even creating fake profiles on dating apps, because if you think about it, a lot of profiles and a lot of emails contain spelling errors and things that if you look at it on the surface, you might be able to pick it apart and say, this doesn't seem legitimate. So I think it does give some advantage in that regard, but I still think we're a little bit far away from seeing generative AI developing really good custom malware that can be used in attacks.
Okay, right. Okay, so basically, I think that was probably one of the questions that I had. Yeah, and then okay, generative AI is probably all of these LLMs. Uh, uh, they have been designed and trained with massive amounts of data, but then a lot of these times, we believe there is also time that when sensitive data can probably be exposed because a lot of them are also out there. So do you think that is also another concern that hasn't had a share of conversation about?
Yeah, I mean, it's ultimately the models are trained on the data that it's been given, and if it's just scouring the internet, training itself based on data from the internet, we know that there's a lot of misconfigurations out there where public data can expose information about customers and organizations. So naturally, there is that concern. I think the bigger concern is when we access these models as individuals working for companies, what sensitive information are we potentially leaking to these organizations? And, for example, if you start sharing proprietary information about your company and you share it with ChatGPT, what's the likelihood that there may be an error coming from them when I'm saying I'm using it, or let's say use it, you see the query I ran, you see some of the data that I shared, and it's building
Right.
that based upon what I've shared. So there's obviously that concern when it comes to the privacy standpoint. Obviously, these organizations are trying to do their best to prevent that from happening. But as you've seen, there have been reports already where that has happened, or there's been bugs found where queries that you've made, I'm seeing the results of those on my end.
Right. Okay, another problem was again the general bias information. Probably a very discriminatory response to certain type of queries. So what can be the best way forward? Probably maybe for OpenAI or probably any other makers of of any upcoming LLM models to keep in mind that these kind of issues are not do not.
Yeah, that's a really important conversation to be had, because a lot of these models are being trained by, individuals, organizations, and we're training it with data that will contain biases. And I think there's been talk about how we can try to address those. I think I've seen a few articles talking about the inherent knowledge that these biases exist. And I think it's just part of that infancy. Like I said in the beginning of this call, we're still in the infancy of these tools like ChatGPT and GPT-4. They're still very, very much far from being something that we can actually trust to provide us with the most accurate information. And sometimes it's not even just the biases themselves, it's also the accuracy too, right? If you ask it a question, let's say it has to do with programming, right? If you're learning programming and you're trying to figure out a solution to a problem, it may give you the wrong answer, or it may give you an answer that could potentially create vulnerable code in your code that you're actually putting together. So we have to take into consideration not just the biases when it comes to the development of these models, but also the inherent inaccuracies that can also come from that as well.
Right. Very well said. So continuing from there, I think one of the other problems that initially came across was that people were asking ChatGPT to write math, and there were a few instances where a few of these malwares did work. In fact, I think it made the life very easy for several script releases also. I think there was a lot of attention on that, and then OpenAI reworked on this. They came back with saying that they fixed these, but then people could still bypass and basically make ChatGPT write the code, probably some nefarious or malicious codes that probably had a malintent. So from there, do you think this is a severe concern? Knowing that at the end of the day, AI will obviously be trained by people who are who do have good intentions, and then there are people with bad intentions. So where do we draw this balance? Where does this lead to?
Yeah, no, I mean, there are inherent challenges too, because I know that there's some people who've been able to basically trick ChatGPT into basically acting and operating as if it doesn't have the barriers that have been put in place by the people that have created it. So you're right, there are concerns about bad actors getting their hands on the ability to craft malware. I still believe, based on what I've seen, that the malware that's being created, it's workable, it's usable, it's functional, but it's not going to be at a level that's on par with what's already out there. And granted, it gives an advantage to up and coming cyber criminals that want to develop or learn about developing malware and things of that nature. But you're not going to see a full-fledged working ransomware product come from generative AI models, at least right now. And I think even if it does come up with a way to encrypt files on a system, it's not going to be at a level of some of the ones that we see today, like Lockbit 3.0 and some of the others that are out there that are currently dominating the ransomware space. I guess it is concerning because it gives them an ability to figure out how to piecemeal it together. Even if it doesn't provide them with everything, it can point you in the right direction at the end of the day.
Right. Okay. So just one more question around the same subject. How much do you think GPT-4 is an evolution of ChatGPT? And then do you find bigger cybersecurity risk or concerns around with GPT-4 or with ChatGPT of the way before?
I mean, I think at this point, based on my working experience with the GPT-4, there's still quite a bit of limitations in place. You know, you only get a certain amount of queries in a certain time period. They haven't fully opened it up to where you can start sharing images with it. I think we're still scratching the surface with that, and I think ultimately, you know, ChatGPT is just sort of one vehicle on this AI highway, if you call it, right? It's one
Right.
way to interface with these large language models. There are others out there, right? You know, we know about Google Bard, for example, that's also out there too. And there's others. I mean, I keep hearing a lot about it. Ultimately, what I think is happening now is that it's become very buzzworthy to really talk about AI, LLMs. If your organization or if you're an individual, if you're not talking about it, then you're considered behind the times. But I think, like I said from the get-go, I think we're still really in the early stages of this. And I think, you know, GPT-4 is obviously going to be superpowering things compared to 3.5 and obviously version 3. But, you know, we'll have to see where things go in the future, what version 5 will look like if they skip over 4.5, for example. But yeah, I mean, I think we've got a pretty long future ahead of us when it comes to LLMs and generative AI. And it's frightening, but it's also potentially, you know, inspiring.
Right. So yes, the thing you started off with the fact that we're just scratching the surface. So what's in store for us? What do you think will be, what's the future of AI in cybersecurity with any tools of these sort, any of these GPT models?
I think broadly what AI is going to do is something I've been kind of concerned about in my own way, about just the loss of jobs, right? It's going to replace a lot of work that we do today. I mean, there have already done studies proving how capable it is at certain tasks. So it's going to eliminate a lot of jobs. And what that looks like in the future, I guess, concerns me because, you know, as a society, you know, we have a lot of individuals who rely on their vocation to earn a living. So what happens when those individuals are displaced from their work? Like there's broader economic impact on society as a whole, and what are countries and governments going to do to help address that? I mean, it's not as though we want to eliminate those jobs, but how are we putting in place the guardrails to help ensure that the individuals whose jobs are lost due to the advancement of AI, like what does that look like? You know, there's been talk of things like a universal basic income, something that I've been interested for many years. That's not something that's really popular in some spaces, but some places have, you know, looked to implement and institute that, and they found some success with it. At the end of the day, you know, there's going to be a lot of job displacement, and that's what concerns me as an individual, because, you know, I worry about how that impacts society and how we, you know, how we will take care of those individuals that lose their jobs.
Right. Okay, so that's one of those negative impacts. What about the positive ones?
I mean, if we can, I think in a perfect world, you know, being able to take a lot of the responsibilities that some workers have, there is some benefit to it, but like there's always going to be trade-offs at the end of the day, right? You have this advancement of this technology that makes it easier to perform these tasks, you know. We don't have to rely on that labor, but then we also lose that labor, and those individuals lose their jobs, lose their incomes. So there's going to be a trade-off naturally as a result. So while I think it's amazing, the technology advancement, what that can do in the future, some of the things that I've seen that have really kind of taken me by surprise, that are not necessarily cybersecurity related, but I don't know if you've been paying attention to some of the generative AI music that have been created. There's a really big, there's been a big hit of a Drake song that was created just in the last week, that people were like, this sounds like Drake, like he actually made it, but it was actually generated by AI, and it's very convincing. So there's it's like, we talked about it barely scratching the surface, but we're also kind of not sure how things will look like in the future. What will that affect, like, the music industry? Cybersecurity, I think, you know, the way that generative AI will have an impact on cybersecurity also remains to be seen. But I think it can have a lot of benefit for organizations if it can help them, identify and address certain, cybersecurity issues in their environment, helping to identify uh, points of failure and things of that nature. So there could be some ways that you can take those generative AI models and then ask certain questions like, okay, which of my systems are vulnerable to this specific CVE, for example? And rather than having to run a query through, a product, you're basically interfacing with this chatbot, and it's going to be able to respond back and tell you, and you can then say, hey, please patch those systems, and then it'll push out the patches to those systems. So there's definitely benefits, but there's also the negatives too.
Right, right, right. Okay, so just to finally, conclude on AI and cybersecurity as such, what where is the evolution? For probably just probably now just leave the generative language models aside. Where do you see the evolution of cybersecurity in terms of AI go from now? I think until now, these are being really good and instrumental tools in finding out anomalies. Maybe you also looking for false positives and all these things. And AI in cybersecurity has been a thing for them. So where is that kind of headed?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, it's been around in different forms. When we think about, like, machine learning has always been kind of something that has been talked about a lot, especially in the cybersecurity space. And now AI is obviously the new, I guess, coat of paint that we're applying to when we discuss some of the elements of cybersecurity that can be improved with, large language models and artificial intelligence. I think it's really hard to say, like, how each organization out there that works in the realm of cybersecurity will leverage these tools. But I mean, when I think about it, like I gave you the example earlier, just talking about being able to identify gaps in your environment, I think that's one element. I think it's a combination of both the large language models and then the natural language processing, being able to ask questions as if you were talking to another human being instead of a large language model or a GPT chatbot. Being able to ask questions rather than trying to figure out, what does CVSS score mean, like things that are very obtuse to some individuals. Being able to ask questions like, okay, that you're able to understand, and that model is able to convey back to you in an easy to understand way.
All right. Okay. So I think okay, the crypto industry is dying, and then it feels like dying. That's a general consensus. So and then of course there are several tax tactics used by some cryptocurrency scammers on social media. So where is that market heading?
I don't necessarily think that the cryptocurrency industry is dying per se. I think there's been a lot of talk about legislation, and I think at the end of the day, regulation is going to be a good thing for cryptocurrency. It'll actually give it some additional legitimacy
Right.
in the eyes of a lot of organizations that may be on the fence about incorporating it, and it also gives some clarity around it too, because right now it's very easy for cyber criminals and scammers to take advantage of individuals, because there's really not a whole lot that can be done to help address some of the challenges that come from cryptocurrency theft. I mean, I think if you think about it, some of the key threats that have happened over the last few years in terms of the world of cryptocurrency, they're largely about investment fraud, but they're also romance scams, right? We see a lot of that involving cryptocurrency too. Pig butchering has become quite popular over the last couple of years, and I think it's slowly but surely become one of the biggest threats to individual consumers on dating apps and other applications too. And it revolves around the lack of knowledge and understanding of cryptocurrency and how those markets work. And if I convince you to send me money through some type of cryptocurrency platform, there's no way for you to get any sort of recourse to get it back, because you're operating in a way that's outside of centralized authorities. And unlike a bank that can reverse a transaction, you can't really reverse a blockchain transaction. Granted, there's some ways to potentially go and obtain those stolen funds. We've seen the FBI do that in some instances. So it's not that it's completely out of the realm of possibility, but if you're relying on a federal agency like the FBI to help address some of this, it's not a guarantee that they will. They've obviously proven that they can do it, but I think some of the biggest challenges still remain the same. Advanced fee fraud, where you tell someone, I can double your cryptocurrency, pretending to be Elon Musk, pretending to be Vitalik Buterin, the co-founder of Ethereum, as well as getting people to connect their cryptocurrency wallets to phishing websites. And once you connect it to one of these websites, essentially it'll drain the entire wallet and send your cryptocurrency and your NFTs to an attacker's address. And there's, like I said, no really way to recover them.
Right. Okay, so probably lastly, as a business leader or as an organization, what are the best measures that they can have in place to ensure that their digital assets are safe from hackers who are into mining and things like that?
So a few things that individuals can do to kind of protect themselves. I think one of the key things would be to kind of segment your account. So if you want to store your assets somewhere, you can store them on what are known as cold wallets. These are like hardware wallets that aren't plugged into the internet and aren't susceptible to having your funds stolen. So it's sort of keeping it as part of like offline storage. Because if you're using what's known as a hot wallet, this is something like a browser extension like MetaMask or Trust Wallet or any of the other browser-based cryptocurrency wallet extensions. When you go to a website, it'll try to authenticate and connect to that wallet. And if you grant it access, it'll be able to take the funds out of your account. And if you don't know that you're connecting to one of these websites, because it looks just like the real thing. And I mean, I know when we think about like phishing, we always focus on the padlock icon, but we know that it's easy to obtain SSL certificates and have that padlock. And a lot of the domains that they create are very clever and crafty. So I think having separation of your major accounts with funds and NFTs, and only connecting say a burner wallet to something that you're not really sure about, but you want to interact with it. So that way, if they do try to steal funds, it's not going to affect your actual accounts with all of your data. And never ever give out your private keys. Never give out your seed phrases for your wallets. That's probably the biggest piece of advice. If anyone ever asks you for that, never give it out.
Got it. All right, so Tom, it was again an amazing conversation. So delighted to have you. We have always been a fan of your work, so it was really good to have you here.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, and happy to be here, and hope to come back soon.